The American Egyptian Women of Influence podcast aims to be the American Egyptian culture podcast of choice. We believe that our knowledge and our participants' stories will greatly enhance understanding of both cultures. I'm Karen Leggett Aburaya. Rajia Hassib is an Egyptian American author whose newest book is A Pure Heart, a novel about two sisters in the aftermath of the Egyptian Revolution, one of them struggling to reconcile her identities as an Egyptian and New American, the other struggling with her faith in Egypt. There are glimpses of traditionally conservative Egyptian families, suicide bombers, the struggles of foreigners both in the U.S. and Egypt. The New York Times wrote that Hassib articulates the full-bodied chorus of Egypt's voices. Rajia's first novel, In the Language of Miracles, features an Egyptian-American family in New Jersey. Rajia was born in Alexandria, earned a degree in architecture from the University of Alexandria, then came to the United States when she was 23. She now lives in Charleston, West Virginia with her family and has taught English, creative writing, and post-colonial literature, which we'll get to in a minute. And on your website, Rajia, you identify yourself as an Egyptian-American writer, an immigrant, and an avid reader. Why did you pick those three words and phrases to identify yourself?
It's always interesting to think of attributes to, identify yourself with. There are so many to choose from, but I think these are the ones that are most relevant to my writing identity. And because the website is designed to be approachable to people who are interested in my writing, I thought these were the things that would be relevant. That I am an immigrant because that influences a lot of my writing. I am Egyptian American, which also influences a lot of my writing. And just being a reader had to be one of them. I couldn't ignore that. So it's there.
Who are some of your favorite Egyptian authors, particularly ones that maybe Americans don't know about but could read?
I grew up reading Yusuf al-Sabai and of course Naguib Mahfouz, and the interesting thing is I reread Mahfouz in English in one of my college classes here in an international literature class, and I think he's fascinating to read in English. Once you study Western literature, I just developed a whole new appreciation for what he was doing with his writing. So I know that's a name that most people know, but definitely Mahfouz, Yusuf Idris as well. A lot of Egyptian writers, and then nonfiction. Anis Mansour was one of my favorites as a child. So there are a lot of writers that American readers would be interested in, I think.
Now, you write a lot about communities and the interrelationships of people in families and in communities and in neighborhoods. Were you thinking about Mahfouz and the way he does that when you were writing?
I can't say I was. I think it would be a little bit intimidating for me to try to do anything that Mahfouz is doing or was doing. He is so steeped into the actual Egyptian culture of the periods that he was writing in, and I don't think I can duplicate that because most of my experiences were more westernized than the very pure Egyptian community that he's describing.
Now, you're writing in English.
Yes.
Have your books been translated into Arabic?
No, they haven't.
Have you been able to get any reaction to readers in Egypt who've read them in English?
I have, yes, I have, mainly from friends and family members, and sometimes from other Egyptian Americans. And there have been very interesting reactions, and I've been very lucky to feel supported. But
what reaction, particularly from Egyptian Americans, what reaction has surprised you, perhaps?
I think mostly that they seemed to welcome a lot of the things that I delved in that I was scared about. A lot of times when you are trying to portray a minority in a way, there's always the fear that the portrait that I'm presenting is gonna offend someone, especially because obviously I cannot present something that is typical of the entire group. It's always a singular story. And there's always this fear that people will say, well, what you're saying is wrong. And my conviction, of course, is there is no right and wrong. There are multiple narratives, and I'm just presenting one of the narratives. But I was very pleasantly surprised that so far, even the aspects of my writing that I thought would be controversial were actually welcomed by other American Egyptians. So that's good.
Do you have a mission or a purpose when you start, or do you just start with characters, or do you start with a plot line? How do you begin a project?
That's an excellent question. I have, I wouldn't say mission or a purpose. It's more like an obsession with a topic that I feel like I need to address. Something that I need to get out of my system, if that makes sense. There are multiple topics that for an Egyptian American or for a Muslim American, I felt that I needed to write about. So I started with this very vague idea of this is what I want to address. Plot-wise, I usually know where I'm heading, but I know nothing in between. So I know where the novel needs to climax, but I don't know how I'm going to get there. And the rest is character development. So I definitely focus more on characters and on how these characters will actually play into the story that I'm trying to tell.
And do you find, and I've heard this from other authors, that the characters sort of lead the way for you, that they start telling you what they want to have happen to them?
You know, I've thought about this question a lot because I heard it a lot, and I know what it's trying to address, but I'm also a little bit skeptical of how mystifying it seems. It's as if the whole thing is kind of magical. There is a degree of magic, but it's not that much out of your control. I think what it is that if you spend enough time developing the characters, you come to a point where you know them well enough that it is easier to change the plot based on what this particular character would do. And I think that's when it becomes this moment where it feels like as if the character is leading the way. But I don't think of it as that as much as it's just this character. I know this person now, and this is what this person would do.
And I mentioned in the beginning that you taught post-colonial literature. What does that include?
It was literature from all over the world, written by various writers who addressed the influence of colonialism on their societies. So it was still fiction. Writers that like Edwidge Danticat, for example, who's one of my favorite authors, and she's Haitian American, multiple other writers, and it was just mainly about trying to view these stories through the lens of the influence of colonialism on a particular society, especially after colonialism has left, how these societies are still, and how the people in these societies are still in ways influenced by that heritage, even if they're not aware of it.
And what are you working on now? What can we look for next? I know you don't want to get into too many details, but anything you'd like to share?
I'm working on another novel. The only thing that makes me skeptical sure a lot about it is that it will definitely change. So whatever I tell you now is not going to be true in 2 or 3 years once it's hopefully done. But it's a multi-generational novel that starts in Egypt in the 1940s. And extends all the way to the US here following a family of Egyptian immigrants.
Well, we'll look forward to reading it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.